we are looking at UNAP 2 monitoring, evaluation, and learning framework because it links more to the data component. I want to mention that UNAP 2 has what we call the meal framework. The meal framework is not food. Meal is monitoring, evaluation, and learning framework. So this framework helps to pull together all the whatever is done from all those sectors and all this, and they evaluated in terms of achieving the presented objectives and goals within UNAP. Therefore, the UNAP 2 becomes our common results framework. All these results which should be done in various sectors have to be measured and evaluated against achieving what is stated there. So you cannot do nutrition in your own sector or in your own organization and say that belongs to NGO only. No, they have to be aligned to the common results framework. The meal framework has the nutrition output, outcome, and impact indicators. It has a baseline, annual indicators, data sources, frequency of data collection, and responsibility centers. This alone speaks to NIPN. Remember where we started from NIPN. NIPN is talking about nutrition information management. It's talking about strengthening the capacity so that there is effective information management. And we are also talking about a common repository and also talking about a dashboard. In the dashboard, we have these outcome indicators and impact indicators for nutrition. What this means, whatever data will be collected from your various sectors and all this will be used to track the implementation and achievement of these indicators. Is that clear to all of us? It also means when we are talking about the central repository, it means the data that you collect regularly out there has also to be brought together in the common repository. And that common repository will help you to access the same information as you plan, develop policies and strategies to implement, but at the same time, you will be contributing to the data that goes into the common repository. What are the UNAP 2 primary outcomes to be achieved by 2025? I will not go through everything, but one of them is reduction in the prevalence of children under 5 who are stunted from 29% to less than 20%. The target is reducing the stunting by 9% there. How shall we know that we have moved from 29% to 20%? We need evidence and we need data. That's where NIPN comes in handy. Reduce and maintain childhood overweight to less than 3%. We need to know and track this indicator if we are going to trace whether we are moving forward or we are moving backwards. Reduce and maintain childhood wasting to less than 3%. We need data and we need evidence. I said I'm not going through everything. I will share this. You can have time to read. Achieve an increase in the rate of exclusive breastfeeding in the first 6 months up to at least 70%. We need information and we need data to track this. Now, you will notice that some of these outcome indicators we have here, some of the data will be in the Ministry of Health, some will be in other sectors. So the NIPN team will play a role of pulling all this data to be able to communicate the changes that are happening in the implementation of UNAP. But it's also very important also to go deeper and know if we've managed to reduce stunting from 29 to 20%, what are those interventions that really worked to reduce that? What does that mean? It means we need to test the effectiveness of some interventions and then advise the government where to invest more resources if we want to see the reduction in some of these figures. So NIPN has a very, very instrumental role to play in this. those were more to specific. Let's look at some of these. I'm just going to pick. I'm not going through everything. For example, proportion of households adopting climate-smart technologies aimed at increasing production of diverse, safe, nutrient-dense crop and animal products. This falls where? Specific, sensitive, or governance, enabling environment? Where? It falls in sensitive. This is under agriculture. So in other words, at some point, there is a need to measure the proportion of households who are adopting climate-smart technologies and which are aimed at increasing production and all that. The question is, as NIPN, where do we find this type of data? It's within the Ministry of Agriculture or maybe the Ministry of Environment, the Department of Climate Change, or wherever. We might find data from those sources. But once we get that data and we are able to analyze that the proportion of those households has increased by this margin and all that, then we should be able to link it to the other nutrition outcomes as contributing factors. So what does this mean? NIPN will play a role beyond the specific indicators and also look at those ones which are sensitive. Proportion of vulnerable population covered by social protection programs. Where do we find social protection programs? Some are Ministry of Gender, some are even OPM, the refugees and all that. So, would be interested as NIPN, and that data will also be collected and used. Now, in conclusion, the UNAP meal linkage with NIPN. The UNAP meal will provide the basis for NIPN nutrition dashboard indicators for nutrition specific, sensitive, and enabling environment. This one I've already alluded to it. I think it's very, very important that when we are working on the dashboard, the nutrition dashboard, we have to link it to these indicators. NIPN should support generation of technical and policy briefs. This is about communication, influencing implementation, but also influencing other policies, sectoral policies that are coming up to aid the implementation of UNAP 2. I want to mention from a policy perspective. If you look at the policy terrain in the country around nutrition, it's at a very advanced stage. We have the policy, nutrition policy, which is, I think, is going to cabinet for approval. We have the UNAP 2, which has been validated. Then we have the MICAN in the Ministry of Health. We have all those policies at very advanced stages. So when we are using all this data and doing this analysis, some of the policy briefs may not be going to influencing those new policies because they are still new, but they could go as products that, or working papers that can facilitate the implementation of the UNAP. For example, if there is a working paper on anemia and malaria, it could stimulate thinking, of course with evidence, stimulate thinking on how people could intervene in anemia by looking at some of the malaria interventions and all that. It could be a working paper on stunting, a working paper on dietary diversity and minimum dietary acceptable diet. All those could be some papers which NIPN will produce, but aimed at accelerating the implementation. The last point is, NIPN should leverage and popularize reporting on nutrition-sensitive indicators that are already available in the sector, management information systems. Yes, reporting. I think the biggest challenge of UNAP 1 was reporting. No one knew who is doing what where, but everyone was busy doing. But the Secretariat, Mr. Marvin will concur with me, was not sure. And when they called the multi-sectoral technical committee to report, one says one or two things, he says have reported. But is that the acceptable reporting for government? I don't think it was. So NIPN should also play a role in encouraging technical reporting, encouraging detailed reporting with data and evidence, so that we are able to track what is really going on. And here, Charles emphasizes reporting on nutrition-sensitive indicators that are already available in the sector management information systems. What does this mean? All the sector-specific indicators you see whether they are from water, education, and all that, they are actually coming from the sector strategic plans. Can I repeat that? All the interventions in UNAP 2 that relate to nutrition from sectors or MDAs, they are actually from your investment what? They are called what? Strategic plans. Meaning these indicators are also linked to your sector plans. That's why you see the proportion of those who are adopting climate change. That one is an indicator for what the Ministry of Agriculture, in partnership with the Water and the Environment, are planning to do. In a multi-sectoral spirit, we are only saying it comes here to be monitored through the UNAP 2. And that's the multi-sectoral nature we are talking about. So there is nothing new in the implementation of UNAP that is not actually already planned and decided on in your own sectors. So ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Mr. Charles Asimwe, I've done my part. But the linkages we've already seen, but there is another important activity we are going to be doing in this workshop. We want to set a foundation for you to start asking, within my own sector, within my own department or agency, what are the policy processes? What are certain practices or actions that are going on in there that are supportive to the implementation of UNAP 2 that would need to be supported by NIPN, that are happening within your sectors that we don't know. When we go to reflect on those, you should be able also to link them to what? To UNAP 2.
It evokes a question from me. Now, since that is one of the key issues we're going to handle, are you going to give us the 37 slides you presented so that we can see where our respective sectors fall? Because without that, then we may not exactly memorize whatever you presented.
Okay, we can share if you have laptops on computer. You can share online. That's one, but for purposes of reference. But also for me, I was emphasizing the issue that it should be at the back of our mind that when you are looking at your sector from a nutrition perspective, from the NIPN perspective, you are telling yourself, how does this contribute to the UNAP implementation? But at the same time, how can NIPN be supportive, either in terms of data, either policy briefs or whatever, to take us there? So this is a foundational. C-O-C-O-N-U-T. You right, okay? 1, 2, 3, start. C-O-C-O-N-U-T. C-O-C-O-N-U-T. Okay, that's enough. That's it. If you remember the presentations we had on the overview of NIPN, one of the key things was about policy reviews, policy influencing, and using data or evidence to do this. Now, the way the process is designed, you must have policy questions or nutrition-relevant policy questions for you to seek data analysis so that we answer those questions and then you are able to implement. But now, I want to take you through the process, and after looking at the process, then we shall go and look at the details of what we want achieved. Now, very quickly, NIPN has two major components. Component one is the policy component. The second one is the data component. And we've already said the data component is housed at UBOS, the data analysis unit. The policy component or the policy unit is housed at OPM. Agreed? But we also have the policy advisory committee. Who is on that policy advisory committee are members from the sectors, from the agencies and departments, from the planning units, M&E and all that, that contribute policy questions or policy issues that are later answered with data from the data analysis unit, then taken back to the policy unit to communicate them out there in the form of policy briefs, knowledge products like info sheets, fact sheets, and all that. I'm trying to summarize all this. And when they have been communicated out, they go to the decision makers so that the decision makers can make informed decisions and choices around whatever issue we are trying to deal with. Now, the process, NIPN has an operational cycle, and this operational cycle begins with the questions. When we talk about a question here, is what some people call it the policy ask. What is it that we need to deal with? Looking at the UNAP 2, the contextual analysis, the situation, the outcome indicators, the interventions, and all that. In your sector, what are your policy asks? What are your policy questions or issues or things that are still gray for you if you have to contribute to the implementation of UNAP 2? That is the starting point. So within the sectors, we expect to get questions. Once we get the questions, these questions go to the analysis unit. Are you following the process? They go to the to the data analysis unit. The data analysis unit, using the existing data sets, they will try to identify the data that can help answer those questions. And once they have been answered, they will take them back to the policy unit, which has the communications function. And I think in the morning we've shared we have a communications officer working with us, other policy people, and we are able to generate policy briefs and all other documents with evidence. And then we send them to the different stakeholders or actors who are involved in policy reviews, policy development, and all that, and those who are in implementation to receive advice on investment and all that. Now, if you look at this process, the data component or the data analysis unit, to do good analysis, they also have to identify available data. They have to look at what is available. And if they find any data gap, they will make sure that within the system they work towards having some kind of data gap filling. But once that is done to the communication, then it informs the policy and other decision makers. In a nutshell, that is the process. Now, coming to this workshop, in this workshop, we wanted to do two major things, and they are highlighted in those two blue, what are they called, those things? Pies, what? These ones, these fractions, okay? Those two things there. One is us to be able to look at possible questions and also to think about where the data to answer those questions could be. What does this mean? We shall work in our sector groups, reflect on what opportunities exist within our sectors that NIPN can support or engage you on that can help in the implementation of UNAP 2. That's one. But at the same time, what policy gaps or policy areas do you see which we can table as questions that we can present to the NIPN team for them to generate data or analysis that can help us to answer those policy questions or asks? Is that clear to all of us? Hello? Is that clear? Good. Now, whatever we do or collect from this process, for us we shall subject it to another process of prioritization and analysis, where we shall call the PAC, the Policy Advisory Committee, to engage with whatever you have presented to us here in another meeting before they pass the test of them going to the what? To the data analysis unit. So what we are going to do here is a preliminary process that should give us the calendar of events, whatever you've planned to do, whatever processes you have, and the various policies at the level they are on, and we should be able to go with that for now. But we shall go and refine them before they reach the data analysis unit. But it's very important for us to ask, what is a nutrition policy relevant question? We are talking about questions. In NIPN, we have a working definition of a policy, a nutrition policy relevant question. The questions could be so many in a multisectoral dispensation. There could be so many, but are they nutrition policy relevant questions? So in this meeting, we want to share with you our working definition, and when we are going to engage in the sector groups, these are some of the considerations we need to ask. One, a nutrition policy relevant question is that question that responds to a relevant policy need or a decision maker demand. Remember what we said at the beginning, that we have to be relevant and respond to the needs. In other words, any policy question you raise in your sector that you do need data from NIPN to respond to, it must be relevant to the policy needs or to the decision maker's demand. It must be demand driven, that in this sector, we need to understand this. For example, Ministry of Trade, possibly you've been working and there's a lot of food fortification that is happening there. Within that sector, you should be able to raise questions around the policy. For example, does food fortification respond to anemia in the country? Maybe something like that. If it's demanded and written to us, and it's going to be relevant to the policy, then NIPN will respond with existing data to give you the evidence for you to think about the next steps. Number two, it must be answered using the existing data and technical capacities available in NIPN. Why are we saying this? For example, you can raise a question that cannot be answered by existing data. We cannot go into primary research to look for data and all that. In other words, we'll try as much as possible to use the existing data. Then the technical capacities, meaning, do we have the internal capacity to do that analysis and all that? You may not know from your side, but when we come and look at it and we find we don't have capacity and that data doesn't exist, you'll be communicated back and say that one is put on the hold until we find the data, or we get the right capacities to deal with it. The third element of a nutrition policy relevant question is it provides timely output for policy use or action. For example, we are at the point of working on NDP 3. The policy question you are raising would want to influence NDP 3, but the time of answering it may need maybe 3 years. It will not be timely to influence the policy that we want to influence. Should we find it's not going to be possible, then it cannot be a policy question that we can deal with. Is that clear? Yeah, those whom I've interacted with wanted to produce a policy brief on breastfeeding week. Somehow, it came out after the breastfeeding week had ended. What happens? It was shelved. Now, if we are to use it next year, we are told, yeah, there is another breastfeeding day week next year. Yes, it can work, but it may need to be updated and reviewed. The last point on a nutrition policy relevant question is which it should answer or lead to actionable recommendations and decisions to stakeholders. Whenever it's answered, it should lead to actionable recommendations and decisions to be taken by stakeholders. Those are fundamentals. So as we shall engage in this process, this benchmark we'll keep it at the back of our mind and keep questioning. We shall come up with many questions or many issues, but even at the level of refining them, we shall apply this principle. Within our sectors, the process of formulating policy questions is as simple as this. Identify nutrition policy demand and initial questions or initial issues. That is step one. But in that, we have to ensure these are aligned with the national decision-making priorities and calendar. That's why when we go into group work some few minutes from now, we need to look at the calendars we have within our own sectors in terms of policy development, in terms of programming, in terms of planning, to see that some of these policy demands are linked to those plans. The second step is formulate the policy relevant question. As I have described them, we have to ensure policy relevance in those questions. Are they policy relevant? You see, some questions could be very operational at a very, very lower level. Those ones, we are not looking at those. We are more interested in those that are at policy level. The third step is refining questions to be answered with available data and capacity, ensure technical feasibility. Now, this is where he said we shall engage the PAC, the Police Advisory Committee, to refine the questions and also ensure that, because we have to involve the data analysis unit and the policy units to ensure that they have that technical feasibility that we want for them to be answered. And the last step is finalize and validate questions. Here we prioritize the questions that meet all the previous criteria. What that means is you could have started from this workshop with 20 questions. We could end up with 4 or 5 that meets the criteria, and those are the ones which will be answered first. Then the rest could be packed and brought out in another phase. On step 1, where we identify nutrition policy demand and initial questions, it can be through a desk review within your sector. You can review whatever information is there. It could be through discussions, like what we are going to do here in the group, reflecting on what we have been going through implementing, and the UNAP 2, we could come up with the initial look at, generate some information from there. When it comes from late policy relevant questions, you can have in form of a consultative workshop, like this one. We can consult and come up with what we can come up with. Refining the questions to be answered here, it's mostly NIPN's team, the internal work, but also working with the Police Advisory Committee. Then finalize and validate questions. Then this one is the Police Advisory Committee, and then the NIPN's team. This one takes us back in terms of the process. Here we've put the picture of UNAP. Do you remember that one? The old UNAP. Because these ones we still have drafts and all that, but this is just to emphasize that whatever we are doing has to be linked to that. And in terms of scope of the process, it's clear. It should be in relation to policy and programs. Then we're also saying the strategic decisions to be made here must be of multi-sectoral in nature, and whatever we are doing should be in relation to sectors, because the sectors are at the center of all this.
Again, my name is Sumit. I work for UNICEF, and I'm part of this project from UNICEF side. Just to initiate the discussion, I missed the morning presentation, but I'm sure the presentation was more on the overview of NIPN, where Patrick and Nasul must have discussed about how 2 units working together as part of this project. One is policy unit, which is under OPM, and another is analysis unit, which is under UBOS. Now, the data analysis unit role is very much guided by the policy unit. And when we are saying policy unit, though it's seated at OPM, it's not only the OPM role to have that policy unit. That also should be, or it's supposed to be supported by different sectors and different stakeholders. Now, As part of that responsibility, this presentation from Patrick is about how we can have a policy question. Because unless and until policy unit identifies those priority policy questions for nutrition, that can't be addressed or answered by the analysis unit. Because let's say we are talking about what are the determinants of stunting in this country. Do we know? Maybe we might have known from previous data, maybe in 2000 or 2010. Maybe we don't have the recent data or the recent analysis. I'm just throwing some random question just to initiate the discussion. Let's say if we are talking about what are the factors responsible for high rate of stunting in this country. If we don't know, then that can be one policy question. But then that question would then go to the analysis unit, and then the analysis unit will look at the question and tell the policy unit that this question might not be answered because of this reason that we don't have these data, what we are looking for. Or if we have data, then you might have to refine. So the presentation is about the process or the steps should be taken to come up with that policy question. Now, the OPM is leading the multi-sectoral coordination in this country. So they might have some broader question, but then some of the question might be very, sectoral specific. Let's say let's talk about agriculture sector. Now, what kind of interventions, let's say, is agriculture sector doing to improve the dietary diversity in this country? That could be one question. We might not know. But then, do we have data to answer those questions? So this presentation is talking about the process that needs to be taken to come up with the policy question. And there is some a specific guideline. Patrick might have explained you. It's not that we can just come up with a question in a way which is not very much specific. We all know this a smart way of coming up with the questions. So we need to follow that, whether we are asking a specific questions, whether it's measurable, whether it's time-bound, whether it's realistic to be answered. So all those things will be, I think, discussed in this group work. So maybe, Patrick, are we talking about to break into groups here?
Yes,
right now? And then maybe